This video is sponsored by you and your wonderful support on Patreon. Help me continue to make more videos and get access to exclusive stuff by heading to patreon.com/writingongames. Thank you so much for your support, and now on with the show. I don't think it's a particularly controversial statement to say that there has never been a good adaptation of Tekken outside of the games. And it's odd because I just made a video a few months back talking about how invested I've always been in the absolutely wild tapestry of lore surrounding the franchise, spun over decades, and seeing the development team dedicate themselves wholeheartedly to representing every eventuality of the question. You know, what would happen if anyone outside of the canonical endings won this tournament? This is the kind of franchise, with all its crazy characters and accompanying action, that seems ripe for development in some other medium. Taking those lore tidbits, built up through incredibly brief post-arcade mode cutscenes, and expanding it all into a more traditionally structured narrative. And yet, the multiple attempts to bring this franchise to the screen over the years have seen results vary from boring to hilariously bad to downright unwatchable. And of course, good video game shows or films are an infamously rare breed. But Tekken's story, for as absurd and out there as it can get, is largely conveyed through more conventional visual media, text and images, rather than its albeit stellar gameplay. On the surface, it doesn't seem like there are many reasons why an adaptation of this thing fundamentally couldn't work. Well, enter Tekken Bloodline, a 6-episode anime recently released on Netflix that seeks to really knuckle down where others have merely wandered, forgoing the reams of non-canonical fluff that forms the basis of most of these adaptations, and instead focusing on perhaps the pivotal moment of the franchise timeline, and the familial feud of the Mishimas serving as the driving force of it all, fleshing out the events leading up to and including Tekken 3, and importantly, relaying the backstory of its cover fighter, Jin Kazama. And indeed, Bloodline hits all the major plot beats in that regard: the death of his mother June at the hands of ancient fighting spirit Ogre, the training he receives from his grandfather Heihachi in the wake of this loss, and the resulting King of Iron Fist tournament held to lure out the demons so Jin can supposedly get his revenge. That is, until his grandfather's grand plan gets set into motion. And that's the interesting thing. If you were to just play the games Tekken 2 and 3 without reading the accompanying manuals, there is a good chance you would never know that all of this stuff was going on. See, we're already off to a promising start with Bloodline. The writers make the wise choice to take some minor liberties in terms of the precise timing of events and the characters found within, in order that they can turn this previously disparate smattering of lore into a legible plot. The small details it does shift around serving to recontextualize the bigger picture of this well-trodden familial struggle in ways that I think some longtime fans might find pretty fascinating, making moves that force said fans to reconsider their opinions on certain long-established characters. But that's not to say that Bloodline is perfect or some must-watch masterpiece. What makes it fascinating has just as much to do with its shortcomings and what they tell us about this franchise's storytelling as a whole, as it does Bloodline's still very evident strengths. It's just that following that first episode, you'd be excused for not picking up on those strengths just yet. Let's just say that even beyond its awkward setting of the groundwork that will be mostly familiar to franchise fans, Bloodline doesn't exactly make the best first impression with its visuals. For one, and this is something I saw smatterings of around the release of the trailers for the show, but what is up with these shadows? It's as if, regardless of where the characters are standing, whether it's a densely wooded forest area, in an office building, or completely out in the open, they're always within feet of some pointed obelisk perpetually hanging over them and blocking out the light in a perfect triangle, one that shifts and tilts wherever our characters move. I'm fairly sure this is not how shadows work. I get that they're trying to go for this look of daunting imposition, where shady characters are appropriately doused in shadow, but this effect loses its impact when every character is encased in this darkness at all times, regardless of the lighting conditions, instead creating this unintentionally murky effect where even when brightening my screen beyond where I would normally set it, and despite the flashiness of the moves and action on show, it all just looks a bit drab for the most part, significantly undermining Bloodline's often neat and inventive takes on established character designs. It speaks to a kind of rushed quality that's mirrored through certain scenes where they'll hold on a still image for just long enough that you wonder if your stream has frozen, or when they try to animate characters running towards the screen, which always ends up looking like said character characters have just enjoyed a large chicken dinner and haven't quite shaken the meat sweats yet, and this quality is all the more surprising given the care that otherwise goes into the smaller details of this show. That is to say, while the set dressing often leaves a lot to be desired, the actual fights that anchor Bloodline are often exactly what I'm looking for out of an adaptation such as this. Prior attempts have always struggled to capture the unique character of the franchise's trademark action, whether it be a result of rudimentary animation or real people not being able to move as they do in-game, but it would seem with that Netflix budget behind them, the team is able to really bring out the personality of these different characters. It's really neat to be presented moves that you're used to seeing in the games, moves you might have performed for decades at this point, bolstered further by the character-specific bursts that accompany each hit, the floaty white bubble of a guarded blow, Ogre's demonic purple cloud, the lightning of Heihachi and Jin, the fire of Paul Phoenix, and the playful fireworks of Xiao Yu. Sure, sometimes the rapidly swinging camera can sometimes leave you wondering where characters actually are in relation to the rest of the arena, moments where you find yourself wishing everything would just stay still enough and clear the shot to give you the wide open view of this combat. Because not only does said action illustrate just how devastating these hits are, in a way not previously emphasized in the games, where shattering a character's leg mid-tournament is depicted as the kind of whoa, too far moment it probably would be perceived as in real life, or you're taken through the multiple bone-crunching steps involved in this hulking mound of jaguar-masked muscle performing full-strength wrestling moves on what is, ostensibly, a high school kid. No, this action, when given the chance, often goes a step further and manages to convey the personality of the individuals performing it, telling the story, sometimes more effectively than the actual dialogue. For example, the Kazama fighting style taught to Jin by his mother June, with the flowing agility of its arcing kicks and use of opponents' momentum and position against them, stands in firm opposition to the blocky, brutish, staccato rhythms of the Mishima style Heihachi ruthlessly instills into his protege instead. The former is a reflection of the delicate splendor of nature surrounding our protagonists, a desire to maintain that natural flow of things. Jun is portrayed as a pacifist and one who especially wants Jin to appreciate the beauty all around him before experiencing and becoming accustomed to the evils of the world. Combat is a means to an end. When all other options fail, it serves as a method of controlling a situation and your emotions decisively in the immediate moment, so these characters can swiftly return to appreciating what really matters in life. The Mishima style, on the other hand, is all about drawing on past rage and sadness in order to explosively unleash said anger on your opponent, almost sadistically inflicting as much pain on them as possible, reflecting the same anguish and misery gnawing away at its practitioners. In this sense, Bloodline takes the disparate fragments of the Tekken 2-3 timeline and morphs it into a kind of tragedy of Jin desperately holding on to what little youthful humanity he has left, ingrained in him by a mother whose presence, as in the games, becomes something of a spectre hovering over the events of the show, watching, judging her son as said humanity is drilled out of him over the years, as he's groomed and manipulated by Heihachi into a distrust of the world around him. If you can't tell already, I think this aspect of the show is kind of great. With all of this, Bloodline has solved perhaps the biggest problem with Tekken's central story over the years. See, here we have a tale that actually manages to paint a member of the Mishima bloodline in a sympathetic light, something the games have rarely, if ever, achieved, and previously the biggest hurdle to actually caring about this daft family plot at the center of this narrative universe. In a world of hyper-rich, moody arseholes making absolutely moronic and evil decisions regarding their military multinational corporation, all in a bid to eliminate each other in increasingly hilarious ways, what Bloodline shows is that ultimately Jin is just a child whose vulnerabilities are preyed upon in the wake of his mother's violent death. A child whose curiosity about the world is constantly decried as a failing. Destroy first, ask questions later, or die, weakling. With this context, it's no wonder Jin became such a brooding, unlikable bastard, especially in the later games. A fact made all the more tragic given how Bloodline illustrates his capacity and desire to get along with others. His ongoing rivalry with Hwoarang is shown to be just that, two kids being dickheads to each other that will absolutely still come to each other's aid if needed. Xiao Yu, long depicted as Jin's adoring schoolyard chum, is here given a real chance to shine, being the person Jin opens up to most, whom he jokes around with and looks out for, all while simultaneously respecting her capabilities as a fighter. We see he has a sense of humour, friends, people he cares for and who care for him, which makes Heihachi's plans for the kid, knowing he'll be torn away from these slightly more normal aspects of life and growing up, sting all the more. The show even takes the time to explore a facet of Jin's character that I don't think anyone could have expected it to. His desire for flames on his uniform. You know, Tekken 3 came out in the 90s. If you were a kid back then, you were considered a weirdo if you didn't want garish Guy Fieri flames on all your clothes. But I guess that's just it. The show really goes to the effort to highlight just how much of a daft wee teenager Jin actually is. A fact not so readily apparent when we've only ever seen him as tall and as built as a giant mohawked mech, for example. But for all that this Mishima Bloodline feud is narratively expanded upon in some really interesting ways, as a longtime fan of the series, I can't help but feel that it comes at the same cost prior adaptations and even the games themselves have always been paying in their fixation on these same characters over and over again. Namely, that by maintaining such a blinkered view of what really matters here, the supporting cast that has always turned this franchise into such a gloriously absurd and varied universe once again gets remarkably short shrift here, further cementing my long-held belief that Tekken might have more interesting stories to tell than the Mishima saga, that possibly as a result of its short 6-episode runtime, it never gets the chance to. It would have been interesting, for example, to get some more insight into how the aforementioned beef with Hwoarang actually came to be, the establishment of which we're given one brief glimpse of as part of a random street fight between the two, awkwardly mashed into a larger training montage. From there, it's just assumed the two share a rivalry that both insist is far from friendly, with little more context given that in-game cutscenes don't already provide. Similarly, Xiao Yu, for as neat as her characterization is otherwise, just randomly, silently shows up as Jin's assumed school friend. I guess this is the kind of detail that, in a broad sense, should be the very purpose of a show like this. Sure, it's kind of cool to see Ganryu as Zaibatsu security, it's neat to hear Heihachi talk about his father Jinpachi in surprisingly reverent terms or reference Michelle Chang and Li Chaolan, but at the end of the day, that's all this stuff really is. References, lip service paid before getting back to Jin and Heihachi, designed to get you saying, oh, there's that dude, and little else. Personally, I would love a full-scale adaptation that didn't focus on the Mishimas at all. You know, biker dude Paul Phoenix gets a bit of screen time and voice lines here or there that, for the record, do appropriately capture his dumb but affable demeanour, but we get absolutely nothing regarding his friendship with Law beyond a brief mention of the character by name, despite this forming perhaps the consistently funniest and most heartwarming relationship in the entire franchise. Even a series of vignette-style stories focused on their various misadventures would excite me to no end. Likewise, no one ever seems to know what to do with Yoshimitsu beyond he's a weird alien dude with a sword. But Yoshimitsu seems like he has the makings of a pretty compelling hero, honestly. He's a Robin Hood type. Odd, sure, but this more humorous side is merely the surface to a character who both gives a shit about helping those around him, especially those he's close to, and becomes driven by a burning need for revenge when those people get hurt. As far as Tekken lore goes, he's one of the more complex characters of the bunch, and as evidenced by the solitary shot you see of him in Bloodline, he's a character that throughout the franchise barely gets any substantial exploration, one that I can't help but think would make for a series at least as interesting as the one I've just watched. I mean, at multiple points, the show itself acknowledges that alongside the absurdity of Paul fighting a grizzly bear and the fact that Xiao Yu is going up against an actual assassin, that everyone has their reasons for being a part of this tournament, and that Jin's story isn't inherently more important. This is adding a layer of complexity to Jin's character that the games never have. Part of the reason the story of Tekken 7 fell as flat as it did for me was the relegation representation of all these characters as far to the wayside as possible. And here we have a story straight up saying that those stories of those different characters matter just as much as Jin's, and yet, again, probably as a result of the short 6-episode run we're provided, the show just ends up telling that same familial feud story one more time. To be clear, Bloodline is about as close as we've ever gotten to a decent Tekken adaptation outside of the games. But over the multiple attempts to bring this densely packed lore to the screen over the decades, part of me will always wonder if it's better off as just that, lore, tidbits that allow you to fill in the blanks, that ask you to get on board with the multiple winding timelines the games establish, in which control over the most powerful military conglomerate in the world goes to a bear or his goofy biker rival, stuff that ultimately might just be too daft to spin out into a grand traditional narrative that asks the audience to take it seriously, but where the team's dedication to this absurdity makes for such a fun challenge piecing it all together, alongside the silky smooth combat mechanics you're here for. It strikes me, as I've been writing all this stuff about wanting a show based on the weird sword alien or the martial arts restaurant owner, there's an argument to be made that the intended audience of Bloodline is kind of unclear. I get the feeling that outside of some technical showiness that, as we've established, the show often manages to undermine, Bloodline will do exceedingly little for newcomers to the franchise, unaware of why this chunk of the Tekken timeline is so significant. They might be asking, okay, why did someone as seemingly on the ball and able to read people as Jun, someone who explicitly wanted to protect her son from the evils of the world, decide that the best course of action was to send Jin specifically to find Heihachi, a dude we're told is well known for being comically evil? Or they'll be asking, wait, is that it? As credits roll on episode 6, in a move that could be said to capture the abruptness of the cutscene it's drawing from, as well as leaving more than enough room for future seasons to expand the narratives of later games, but at the expense of offering much at all in the way of narrative resolution. Indeed, outside of serving as the logical conclusion of Jin's tragic arc, becoming just another part of the Mishima bloodline as the devil in him wins out, without knowing where this goes in future titles, and it's not even particularly well resolved there, I can see a lot of newcomers wondering if there's some kind of problem with Netflix, confusedly searching out a next episode that currently doesn't exist. Further though, for a decent chunk of its runtime, I also struggle to imagine the show resonating too deeply with seasoned veterans of the franchise beyond what they already know. However, for those people specifically, as the season goes on, it introduces enough wrinkles in its storytelling that at the very least justify the relatively short amount of time you'll actually spend watching it, whose surprising competencies certainly don't make for the most mind-blowing piece of television ever produced by any means, but do illuminate the very real potential of this franchise for further stories to be told down the line. Basically, why are we further bleeding the stone of this tired family beef we've seen a million times over when there's a perfectly good heist tale with more relatable, sympathetic characters that meets just as tragic an end, just waiting for the screen treatment? If there's ever a Bloodline Season 2, I know which story I'd rather see told. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, check out my podcast, and follow me on Twitch if you're so inclined. These videos are made possible by the support of my wonderful patrons whose names you're seeing on screen now. They've also been getting access to more exclusive content I've been producing. Pieces on Teardown, Fortnite, games criticism at large, what are set to be fully produced scripted videos that feel like a better fit on a smaller platform like Patreon. If you want to help the channel continue and see more content, as well as entirely ad-free uploads, just head to patreon.com/writingongames and pledge only what you feel comfortable with. I am forever thankful for your support in whatever form it takes. Special thanks go to Mark B. Writing, Artyom Vitsyuk, Charles J. Liu, Alistair Dunn, Vitautis Catharsis, Matthew Bowman, Ben Pace, David Karstens, New Static, Mike G, Tom Webster, Max Cohen, Dana Sikauskis, Christopher Faherty, Nicholas Villeneuve, Newen Palacios, Ruth Knapman, Yogesh Deshpande, Leah Chinello, Captain Knusprig, Bryce Snyder, Lucas, David Björk, Winter, Timothy Jones, Matthew Grover, The Nameless Guy, Urban Cheese, Tommy Carver Chaplin, Dr. Motorcycle, Shardfire, Lynn Browning, Calliope Ranis, Vila Nurmi, Spike Jones, Dallas Keane, Charlie Kimball, Jordan Midler, and Charlie Yang. And with that, this has been another episode of Writing on Games. Thank you all so much for watching, stay safe, and I will see you all next time.